tapping with the music as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay, Don. Make sure I've got my sound shared as well. Okay. There we go. So I'm actually not sure how many of you are previously familiar with Rayjon Share Care. So just as a quick backstory, we were founded in 1986 by the late Ray Wierzykowski and Mr. John Barnfield, who Alan so kindly mentioned with concern this morning. And it's our mission to support partners in Haiti and the Dominican Republic to enhance their well-being and capacity. Historically, Rayjon has also supported awareness trips to both Haiti and the Dominican to bring thousands of Canadian visitors there to experience the vibrant culture firsthand and to learn a little bit more about sustainable development and how it's being led from a local perspective. And finally, we also have eyeglass trips that prepare and distribute prescription eyeglasses in 10 different countries through Latin America and the Caribbean. Of course, all our trips are currently on hold with COVID, but everything that's happening in Haiti and the Dominican continues strong. And so our support is primarily founded through education, healthcare, capacity building, and the empowerment of women. But I'd like to ask you this morning, what is it that comes to your mind when you think about Haiti? What images pop into your head? Now, you may have noticed that Haitian news that tends to reach Canadian eyes and ears isn't all that positive. And certainly there's a lot of very difficult situations in Haiti right now, which I will speak to this morning. Starting with the gas tanker explosion that occurred in mid-December. You probably heard this on the news. The explosion killed more than 75 people and injured hundreds more, completely devastating several very marginalized neighborhoods in Cap Haitian, which is Haiti's second largest city and urban center. Now, to give you a little bit more detail about what happened, that gas tanker flipped on its side when it swerved to avoid an oncoming motorcycle. And this occurred around midnight in a neighborhood that lacks electricity, so it's very dark. Most families were asleep at the time. And unfortunately, when the tanker flipped on its side, it continued to spew gas into the streets and surrounding area for several hours before the explosion actually occurred. There was very little emergency response. And this neighborhood, highly densely packed with a lot of families living close quartered, there's actually a canal there and a bridge, and the gas continued to leak not just into the streets, but down into the water, into homes that lined both sides of the canal, where it eventually found a single candle that was lit in one of those homes, which caused the explosion, traced the fire all the way back through, and basically decimated these neighborhoods. Now, being that there was only a narrow alleyway as a single escape route in and out, many families were trapped inside. And because there's an ongoing gas crisis in Haiti, what happened right at the tanker was that people were coming into the streets to try and siphon, to try and pick up what they could in buckets to pass off for sale in the black market or for their own needs. The cost of gas in Haiti in the last year has risen upwards of $20 US a gallon. So you can imagine families that are struggling to provide for basic needs just couldn't afford gas. And so jumped at the chance, regardless of the risk, to try and get what they could. So this crisis has been devastating for the community of Cap Haitian in particular. It's probably one of the things you've heard about. And then back up to August, 7.2 on the Richter scale earthquake that killed over 2,000 people, injured 12,000 more. It's estimated that 50,000 homes, churches, office buildings, medical clinics were destroyed or damaged in that crisis, and about 500,000 people affected. And the list goes on. Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated in July. There's been an economic crisis and a horrible exchange rate fluctuation that happened out of nowhere. And what it meant for the many Haitians who were paid in US dollars is that suddenly their paycheck was worth up to 40% less at the very same time as the cost of living was skyrocketing. The gas shortage that I've mentioned, and there's been debilitating gang control and violence, primarily in the capital of Port-au-Prince, but also expanding its territory over the last year. And finally, the institutional vacuum that was created after the president's assassination. There was a power grab following that. There's still no democratically elected leader in Haiti and very little chance of well-organized, fair democratic elections anytime soon. So that's the backstory. That's the context that our Haitian friends are living and working in right now. So a question I'm often asked is there any hope in Haiti, and is progress even possible? Is it somewhere that we should continue to invest in? So as we start discussing that together, I would like to share with you a few words by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Renaud Thomas. Renaud is the community coordinator and manager of Rayjon in Haiti, which is in the St. Marc area, a couple hours northwest of the capital, in a very rural, very mountainous zone. So here's what Renaud has to say, and please just let me know if for some reason you can't hear it. It's a very short clip.
Yeah, probably you hear a lot of things about Haiti. Most of them just problem. Yes, we have a lot of problem here. We have coronavirus, we have gangs, we have political problems, we have, you know, really a lot of problems to resolve. But if you ask me a question like, what can we do now for Haiti? My answer would be like community solution. So we talk about community solution when government just collapse, when all institutions just not functional. So this is the time now for neighbors to get together and to just talk about the common problems and just define what kind of solution they need for the community without considering the general situation of the country. And this is what happened in Haiti now. We are in a particular moment in our history where just neighbors just gonna create problem for the for solution for the problem. Yeah.
So community solutions, what does that look like? And in Haiti's context, what does it actually mean? So I'd like to share with you a couple of examples from where Renaud is working. The photo you can see is of leaders from the Haitian Women's Federation in this area. They are about 350 members strong. They represent 7 different villages in this mountainous region. And the Haitian Women's Federation was actually the very first legally recognized women's association in all of Haiti. For the last couple of years, they've been working very hard on putting together a sustainable breadfruit processing factory. I don't know if you've ever tasted or seen a breadfruit. They're sort of grapefruit size, very dense fruit that grows abundantly in this area. And typically what would happen is that breadfruit would lie on the ground and it would spoil, because a mature breadfruit tree can produce 200 to 300 fruit per year. It would just saturate the market more than anyone can use at that given time. But if done properly, breadfruit can actually be dried and ground into a specialty flour and stored almost indefinitely. Breadfruit flour is highly nutritious and can be used in a variety of baked goods, porridges, sweets, and breads. So this is an economic generating initiative that is cooperative in cooperation with the entire community. So the Women's Federation leaders are working with local farmers who are planting more breadfruit. They've also established a tree nursery on site. There's huge environmental benefits to the initiative because, of course, this is a very deforested area of Haiti. And money that's generated through this project is being reinvested in the community under the leadership of the Women's Federation, whose own leadership has been strengthened. So they have democratically elected leaders. They've been taking additional leadership and management training. And now in each of the villages that they represent, the funds that are generated through this project will support other initiatives like adult literacy classes, like microcredit loans for female entrepreneurs, and additional training. So they're really excited to see the progress. Now, breadfruit is a specialty product. It requires some special propagation techniques. On the right, you can see these women have been out in the community with machetes gathering roots and stems for collection and then planting those with special fertilizer. And I'm delighted to tell you this photo was just sent to me a couple days ago. So 1 month later, the shoots are beginning to grow, real sign of hope and of promise. And it's their goal to have 1,000 trees by June. So this is an example of a community solution. It's also an example of self-determination when people have a say in their future. So this initiative isn't because the government stepped in and decided to implement something locally. And it certainly isn't because some rich white foreigners arrived in their fancy cars and tried to solve the problem in a week before they went home. These are ideas that were generated locally using local expertise and bringing that whole community together. community solutions, like Renaud says. Now, Rayjon Share Care, we have the privilege of working with strong and competent Haitian leaders in other areas as well. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's happening in Cap Haitian, which again was the site of the gas tanker explosion. So generally our goal is sustainable development, long-term programs, but disasters do happen. And the gas tanker explosion definitely meant that there was a role for Rayjon along with our partners to step in and provide some emergency support, to rally together around the victims. I'd like to introduce you to Philaine Cabré. Philaine is a single mom. Her children are 4 and 9. She's a marketplace vendor. She's well respected in both in the market where she sells as well as in her own neighborhood. And she lives on that road where the gas tanker explosion occurred. On December 14th, around 11:30 p.m., Philaine and her children were in bed. She was really tired from a long day in the market and normally would have been fast asleep by that time. But she says for some reason she felt restless that evening, continued to check on her children with a candle in her small one-room house, which lacks electricity. And around midnight, she heard that an accident had taken place just outside. She was about to finally drift off to sleep when she heard the explosion that shook the ground and the very walls of her home. Immediately, she knew it was no simple tire blowout. She heard a lot of commotion outside and people beginning to shout, "Get out, fire." She ran quickly, woke up her children, got a few important items together and made her way for the door. She said the door was hot and she could feel the heat making its way into her home as smoke filled the alleyway and she couldn't see where to go. She made it out the other side of the street, placed her children in a safe area, and together they watched as their neighborhood went up in flames. As Philaine stood on the other side of the street, she realized that her neighbor had not come out of the house. So she left someone to watch her children and ran back into the flames, pushing as hard as she could and eventually breaking through the door. She grabbed the 2 children of her neighbor, folded them each under her arms, and ran again as fast as she could to make it out. Upon exiting the home, she immediately passed out and was rushed to the hospital along with the 2 children who had also suffered from smoke inhalation. Philaine has suffered multiple burns in her arms and legs from saving the children of her neighbor. And people had told her she shouldn't have taken that risk, but to her, she felt it was necessary. Unfortunately, Philaine, her own children, her neighbor, and her neighbor's 2 children are alive today because of her heroism. Unfortunately, the father of her neighbor's children did perish in the fire. So after the disaster, the center that Rayjon supports in Cap Haitian, which is called the Center for Nutrition and Education of Women and Children, has had a role in community-centric disaster relief, receiving victims like Philaine, listening to their stories, and prioritizing needs. So there are families right now who are receiving assistance with rent because they've lost a place to live. There are families who needed food or clothing after having all of their possessions gone. There are multiple people who needed help covering medical supplies costs. And this is ongoing. In addition, we're really pleased to be able to support some trauma counseling for the staff at the center who've been shouldering these burdens, as well as the beneficiaries who've been traumatized and lost loved ones. So all of this will be ongoing. I would say that these stories, the contrast of the sustainable development with the Haitian Women's Federation and then more urgent needs through the disaster relief, show the very mixed narratives that happen in Haiti. There isn't a single narrative to define the nation, and in fact, its complexity is really part of the mystery. Yes, there are difficult things happening, but yes, at the same time, there is also progress and hope. A Sarnia-born artist, Aruba Mahmoud, who now lives in London, Ontario, saw a photo I'd taken of this massive tree in Haiti and knew that she wanted to paint it. She says that before she started painting, she decided she wanted to add some additional color because she hoped the tree would represent beauty and joy. As someone who was born and raised in Sarnia, Aruba tells me that all she's ever heard about Haiti in the news was negative, war and political strife and corruption, poverty and disasters and so on. But that resonated with her because it's the same way she feels many other countries are depicted in the West, including Pakistan, which is her parents' homeland. Aruba has visited Pakistan many times and says she's privileged to have witnessed the landscape, natural beauty, the vibrant culture and the handicrafts, the colorful painted trucks, and the delicious and aromatic food. And so while she's never visited Haiti personally, she imagined that it too must be a diverse and colorful nation. And she hoped that the painting would reflect that. With a tree whose branches extend wide and whose roots extend deep, she also hoped it might be a reminder of Haiti's strength, resiliency, and vibrance. Now, my friend Renaud was recently asked, what do Haitians do in the middle of so many struggles? How do they keep themselves safe? And how do they move forward? And he had this to say: if you live in Haiti, you'll find a way to survive. That is the answer. What we continue to do on our side is we continue to teach people about community development, like putting their heads together to do some strategies to survive, because we cannot count on the government. I think Renaud's quote shows that there isn't a single solution or a quick fix to Haiti's problems, but there is a place to start, and maybe that's with putting heads together. That's the title of my talk today, Ansanm, which in Haitian Creole literally means putting your heads together. I've translated it as unity, and it's something that Haitians say a lot. Renaud's quote is combining the reality of a very difficult situation, but meets it with optimism and a plan as a community. And it makes me wonder, what about us? What might our role as a global community be in supporting Haitians through this time? So I'm going to offer a couple of suggestions. So I think, given Unitarian principles, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here. But there's all kinds of ways that we can support. Certainly that's financial support to organizations that are doing their work well. So I would always encourage people to look for organizations where the Haitian people are not passive recipients of aid, but where they're active participants in that change process. Look for long-term sustainable initiatives. But it's not just about funding. In fact, I think that our role actually starts with awareness. Awareness is about more than the eye can see. So I'm going to share with you just a couple photos of the beauty of Haiti as a nation. And I hope that next time maybe you hear some negative news about Haiti, that these are also images that might pop into your head, revealing the complexity and the yes and nature of Haiti, where yes, there is bad things happening, but yes, there is also beauty and hope in life. I would want you to know that the Haitian people are beautiful, that they're intelligent and inventive and strong, that they have endless potential, that they love their children as we love ours, that they have a vibrant culture, dreams for the future, hope, faith, and passion. I'd also like to encourage us to dive a little bit deeper, to take our awareness one step further as we think about what community solutions look like in Haiti. Can we also think of the interconnectedness of the world? Can we think about how Haiti is the only nation on the planet that is the result of a successful slave revolution? Can we imagine how history would have been different if Haiti hadn't paved the way for the end of slavery? And can we ask ourselves, what are the social justice issues that are hidden in disasters? For example, if we go back to the gas tanker explosion, can you imagine how that story would have been different if it had occurred in a neighborhood in Canada or the US? I imagine that if that tanker had flipped in my own residential area, that within minutes, an emergency response would have been launched. We have the infrastructure to do that. I know that there would have been firefighters on scene, that gas would not have leaked for hours into surrounding homes. And I know that victims who needed medical treatment would not have had to walk themselves to the hospital for an hour, only to find that there weren't enough bandages, zero pain medication, and no staff trained in burns. I know that that situation would be different. And so I ask questions about why it's okay that that's the way that it ended up in Haiti. For me, it's a mindset shift. And I think that at Rayjon, we know it's not our role to make changes in Haitian communities, but it is our role to support the conditions for change to happen. One of my very favorite authors in the nonprofit space has suggested that the role of civil society and nonprofit organizations, volunteers, and you and me is to ensure that people in communities most affected by systemic injustice have the resources and autonomy to lead. So that's what we at Rayjon are trying to do. We know that we can't solve problems of Haiti, but we know we can stand in solidarity and in partnership with our Haitian friends and colleagues as they move forward with hope. So in closing, I'd like to ask you that same original question. What comes to your mind now when you think about Haiti? And I would certainly invite your